Dust moved like breath across the dying town of Red Hollow, carrying the faint rattle of loose tin and the smell of old rain that never came. Evening light bled gold over cracked boards and shuttered windows, gilding the ruin with a beauty it did not deserve. Evelyn Hart stood in the middle of that forgotten street, a widow wrapped in threadbare calico, one hand gripping her husband's boots as if holding them might keep him from being gone. The storekeeper had just turned her away, again. No credit, no mercy. Behind her, voices murmured through half-open doors, small and cruel. She's fallen low, poor thing. A woman alone don't last long out here. Words sharp enough to flay the skin from her pride. She walked anyway, because stopping meant remembering. Hunger was quieter than grief, and easier to silence. Her boots scuffed against red dust as she passed the saloon, its windows fogged with laughter. A piano faltered inside, off-key and tired. Evelyn's stomach clenched. She had 3 coins left and no supper to buy with them. By nightfall, the desert would steal the warmth from her bones. Beyond the last building, where the land opened into a plain the color of rust, she saw the Boone ranch, fences silvered with age, a windmill turning slow and patient. The man who owned it, Caleb Boone, was said to have lost his wife in the flood 3 winters ago and his heart soon after. Folks called him hard as sun-baked clay, the kind that cracked before it bent. Evelyn had never spoken to him, but desperation makes strangers into last chances. By the time she reached his porch, dusk had thinned to blue. She stood there, pulse fluttering like a bird trapped under glass, rehearsing words that tasted like ash. When the door opened, he filled the frame, a tall man with shoulders squared from labor, a beard touched by gray, eyes pale and watchful. "Evening, ma'am," he said. His voice was low, gravel and calm. "You lost?" Evelyn shook her head. "Hungry." The single word carried everything she couldn't say. He waited, neither kind nor cruel, only measuring. She forced herself to go on. "I can work. Clean, mend, cook. I'll earn what I eat." The silence stretched until she felt her face burn. Shame made her bold. "And if that's not enough, I can offer myself, for whatever you'll give." The air between them froze. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, long and hollow. Caleb Boone's gaze didn't move from hers. He stepped aside, slow as the turning of a page. "You'll work," he said. "But under my roof, no one pays with their body. You'll keep your dignity, Mrs. Hart, or you'll leave it at the door when you go." She nodded, throat tight, unable to thank him without sounding like she might break. Inside, the house smelled of saddle oil and smoke, a man's solitude made into rooms. He showed her the kitchen, the pump out back, a small cot in the pantry. "Start with the horses tomorrow," he said. "They spook easy." That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams etched with moonlight. His words echoed, "You'll keep your dignity." It had been so long since anyone had spoken of it as something she still possessed. Morning came bright and hard. She worked until her palms split, until the rhythm of labor drowned the ache in her belly. Caleb moved like a shadow between tasks, saying little, watching everything. Once, she caught him studying her hands, and he looked away as if embarrassed by his own noticing. At noon, he brought her coffee in a tin cup. She thanked him, he nodded, set it down, and returned to the fence line without a word. Beneath the awkward quiet, something unspoken hummed, an understanding forged not from kindness, but restraint. The town noticed. Martha Dawes, the storekeeper's wife, stopped her one morning on the road. "Living with Boone now, are you? Folks are talking." The words dripped with pity wrapped in poison. Evelyn kept walking, eyes forward, heart hammering. She wanted to say nothing's happening, but the truth was more complicated. Something was happening, just not what they imagined. At the ranch, Caleb fixed a gate while she scrubbed a trough clean. The sun burned low, painting everything copper. She could feel his gaze occasionally flick toward her, as if checking she was real. When the wind shifted, she caught a hint of his scent, leather, rain, and loneliness. Days bled together, work and silence becoming a kind of fragile truce. At dusk, they sat by the fire, the space between them filled with the ticking of the stove and the crackle of wood. One night, he spoke. "My wife, Lydia," he said, staring into the flame. "River took her horse first. Took her next." His hands tightened around his knees. "Never did find her." Evelyn didn't answer. There was nothing to say to a wound still open. She only listened, and in that quiet, something passed between them, mutual recognition of loss, each honoring the other's ruin without touching it. Later, when she rose to leave, he said softly, "You work hard, Mrs. Hart. Don't let them talk you into forgetting that." Outside, stars gathered like spilled salt over the prairie. Evelyn stopped by the corral, the injured colt resting in its pen. She knelt, brushing dust from its muzzle, whispering nonsense to calm it. The animal breathed warm against her palm, trusting her without reason. For the first time in months, she felt steady. In town, she had been pitted, dismissed, reduced to rumor. Here, beneath the wide sky and the careful silence of a grieving man, she was simply enduring. Not saved, not fallen, just alive. That night, wind crept through the cracks of the window, carrying the scent of sage and faraway rain. She sat up on the cot, heart restless. From outside came the faint scrape of boots, the sound of Caleb moving through the yard, checking the animals, keeping watch even when no one asked him to. She thought of what he'd said on the porch, "You'll keep your dignity." The words had felt like mercy then. Now, they sounded like a promise. When she lay down again, the sky was paling toward dawn. Somewhere in the stillness, she realized she no longer feared the morning. The world beyond that window was still cruel, still waiting to test her, but something inside had shifted, a small ember refusing to die. And as the first light spilled across the plains, touching the ranch in quiet gold, Evelyn Hart whispered to herself, not as prayer, but as declaration, maybe this is how survival begins, not with a bargain, but with a breath. Outside, Caleb Boone paused at the fence line, hearing the faint echo of her voice through the open window. He didn't step closer, didn't speak. The sun climbed higher, dust lifting around him like smoke, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them stretched, tense, uncertain, alive, like the held breath before a storm. The summer came hard upon Red Hollow, the air thick as honey and the earth cracked from thirst. Days lengthened into a fevered stillness where even the wind forgot to move. On the Boone ranch, Evelyn rose before dawn to the hum of crickets dying in the heat. Sweat ran down her spine before the sun had even cleared the hills. Caleb worked beside her, his face a map of quiet endurance, his shirt clinging to the curve of his shoulders. Their silence had become its own language, efficient, spare, and necessary. One evening, thunder began to mutter on the far ridge, slow and distant. Caleb watched the horizon darken as if weighing whether to trust the promise of rain. Evelyn stood by the corral, brushing the colt's mane, when lightning forked across the plain. The smell of ozone sharpened. Then the crack, raw, deafening, and in an instant the barn roof blazed white with fire. Caleb shouted, running before thought could catch him. Evelyn followed, skirts heavy with dust. The flames climbed fast, feeding on dry timber and straw. Inside, the horses shrieked and kicked at their stalls. "Stay back," he warned, but she was already at the door, pulling the latch with both hands. Smoke bit her eyes, filled her lungs. A beam crashed, scattering embers like fireflies. She covered her face with her sleeve and pushed through the choking dark until she felt the slick flank of a panicked mare. "Easy, girl," she whispered, voice ragged. Her fingers found the rope, untied it blindly. The animal bolted past her, nearly knocking her to her knees. Then Caleb's arm was around her, dragging her out as another beam split behind them. They fell into the dirt, coughing, the world roaring red. For a long moment neither spoke. When he finally looked at her, the hardness in his eyes had broken. "Don't you ever do that again," he said, voice shaking. "You hear me?" She met his gaze, soot streaking her face. "I wasn't about to watch something else burn." Rain came then, sudden and fierce, hissing over the flames until the smoke turned to steam. They sat together beneath the downpour, shoulders touching, breath shallow with exhaustion. Caleb's hand found hers without intention, rough and trembling. The gesture was brief, but it lit something inside her, something fragile, dangerous, alive. By morning, the barn was half ash. The smell of wet char lingered. Caleb didn't speak of rebuilding. He only worked, jaw set, as though labor itself could mend what fire had taken. Evelyn joined him in silence, both of them moving through the ruins like ghosts determined to stay visible. But the town didn't let silence lie. Gossip ran faster than fire. Martha Dawes told anyone who'd listen that Evelyn had tempted the widower, that she'd used pity to stake her claim. By week's end, even the preacher came riding up the Boone trail, hat in hand, face tight with moral duty. Caleb met him on the porch. Evelyn stood inside the doorway, unseen. "She's a widow," Reverend Pike said. "And you're a man still respected. Folks are talking. If she stays here, it'll stain you both." Caleb leaned against the post, calm but taut. "What they say don't feed me," he answered. The preacher sighed. "Mercy's one thing, Boone. Sin's another. Send her away. End this before it festers." When he left, dust curling behind his horse, Evelyn folded her hands and made her choice. At dawn, she saddled the old mare quietly and placed a note on the table. "Thank you for your kindness. I won't have your name dragged down for mine." She rode out before sunrise, the prairie wide and endless ahead. Each hoofbeat was a thud against her ribs. The sky pinked with early light, the wind cool for once. She didn't cry, she had no tears left to spend. Behind her, Caleb woke to the stillness that follows absence. The note lay by the window, her handwriting neat and careful. He read it twice, then once more, slower, as if each word were a nail he could drive into the shape of his regret. He didn't curse. He didn't eat. He only saddled his horse and followed the road east. He found her near the old creek bed, resting in the shade of a lone cottonwood. She didn't startle when he approached. "I figured you'd be halfway to the next county by now," he said. "I was," she murmured. "Then I realized I had nowhere left to go." He dismounted, stood beside her. "You don't owe me your body, Evelyn. You never did. But don't go throwing away your heart now that it's starting to heal." The words undid her more than any plea could have. She looked at him, dust on his boots, blood at the edge of his sleeve from the fire, eyes soft with something she hadn't seen before. It wasn't possession. It was recognition. A shot rang out. Sharp. Close. Caleb turned instinctively, reaching for the revolver at his hip. A man stumbled from the brush, a drifter, eyes wild, rifle shaking. "Hand over your horse," he snarled. Caleb raised a hand, calm as always. "Take it. No trouble." But the drifter's fear made him reckless. The gun went off. Caleb staggered, the bullet grazing his shoulder. Evelyn's scream tore through the still air. She grabbed the fallen revolver, fired once. The thief collapsed into the dust, clutching his leg, cursing. The silence afterward was deafening. Evelyn dropped the gun, hands trembling. Caleb steadied her with his uninjured arm. "You're bleeding," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "So are you. From the heart, I think." She pressed her forehead to his, breath uneven. The moment hung between them, raw and unspoken, as the wind stirred the tall grass. "You listened," she said softly. "When no one else did." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. They rode back together under a bruised sky, the world washed clean by distance. At the ranch, the ruins of the barn still smoked faintly, but new timber lay stacked nearby, fresh wood waiting for purpose. Caleb dismounted with care, wincing at his wound, and turned toward her. "You could stay," he said simply. Evelyn looked at the horizon, at the town she'd left behind and the land that had nearly killed her but somehow given her back to herself. "Maybe," she whispered. "If the wind allows it." Night fell soft and deep. Inside the house, she lit a lamp and watched its light stretch across the floorboards. Caleb sat by the window, head bowed, the storm long gone but its echoes still humming in their silence. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the crackle of flame and the faint creak of the windmill turning again. Evelyn thought of all she had traded to survive, her pride, her fear, her voice, and of the one thing she had been given back, her worth. When she finally spoke, it was to the darkness itself. "Maybe living isn't about what we keep," she said. "Maybe it's about what we choose to forgive." Outside, dawn crept slow and golden, painting the ranch in fragile light. Caleb lifted his eyes to meet hers, and for a heartbeat the world held still, unfinished, uncertain, and full of breath.